Hey, we got the news over here. Object 787 Gadyuka in development. I'm gonna have a couple drinks over here. Gonna read you the news. That way you don't got to. And this is from February 8th, 2023. Commanders, each battle path has a special vehicle, and I've had a couple of drinks, as you can tell, but it doesn't matter because we're just reading the news here. We're just reading the newspaper. That's all we're doing. You can assemble from blueprints in the Eclipse battle path will continue in that tradition, although with somewhat less emphasis on this aspect. Usually we offer a tier 4 through 7 vehicle as a level progression one and a tier 8 vehicle as a blueprint one. This time around it'll be the opposite. The tier 8 Gepard will be a prize obtainable by reaching level 19, while the blueprint slot will be reserved for the Object 787, also known as the Gadyuka. The Gadyuka, Viper in Russian, is one of the development steps that led to the creation of the BMPT Terminator series that is currently in Russian, Algerian, and Kazakh service. But where did this vehicle come from? As usual, let's take a look at a little bit of its history. The idea of creating a heavily armored, dedicated anti-infantry vehicle was not exclusive to the Soviet Union, but it was the Soviet industry that started working on it intensively as early as the mid 1980s. The experience of Afghanistan and Chechnya taught the Soviets a painful yet valuable lesson. Even heavily armored vehicles armed with cannons were vulnerable to infantry and urban combat. The massive spread of and major improvements in infantry anti-tank weapons further increased this threat to the point where, for a certain time, especially in the West, it was thought that a tank would eventually become obsolete, the way airships and armored trains had many decades before. Others, however, were actively looking for ways to tip the balance of scales in armored vehicles' favor, and one such ideal was to create a heavily armored vehicle with anti-infantry armament to accompany the classic tanks. Protecting your armored vehicle from enemy infantry required certain vehicle features not available to regular tanks. First and foremost, excellent gun elevation was essential to in order to deal with targets above you in hilly or urban environments. This was one of the first things learned by the Soviet troops in Afghanistan. Enemy infantry would often be hiding on hilltops where the standard BMP 1 vehicles could not fire since their elevation was insufficient, and Soviet troops were forced to utilize anti-aircraft vehicles which were well armed but very poorly armored, sometimes vulnerable to small arms fire, as ground support. This this issue was only mitigated by the arrival of the BMP-2. Second very important requirement was to make the vehicle resistant to infantry weapons, specifically to the heat launchers such as the famous RPG series. This called not only for thick armor, ideally composite, but also for massive use of explosive reactive armor covering vulnerable parts of the vehicle. In Afghanistan, however, such a technology was not available en masse. Nevertheless, between 1985 and 1986, the Chelyabinsk tractor plant started working on a program to develop a vehicle they called Mountain Tank, producing three distinct projects between 1987 and 1996. They thought suitable for the tank's support role: Object 781, Object 782, and Object 787, sometimes referred to as Object 745 by certain Russian sources. The Object 781 and Object 782 project were introduced in 1987, were developed by Chelyabinsk under the leadership of V.L. Verschinsky. They were built on heavily modified T-72B hulls with especially the frontal part significantly reworked. But the biggest change by far was the fact that the vehicle sides now housed heavily armored, watertight compartments carrying two stabilized 40mm grenade launchers and ammunition, as well as other systems such as air filtering, fuel tanks, and batteries. This solution significantly increased the side protection of the hull. Of the two modified hulls, one Object 781 was armed with a pair of 30 2872 guns, each in a separate turret and each paired with a 7.62 machine gun, as well as anti-tank guided missile system Conkers or Cornet, and either 7.62 or 12.7 machine guns mounted externally near the commander's hatch. The second object the object 72, the second, had a low-profile two-man turret armed with a low recoil rifled 100mm 2A70 gun, paired with one 30mm 2A72 cannon. The turret was also fitted with additional 40mm grenade launcher in addition to the one in the hull. Maybe this calls for a shot of vodka. What do you say? Here, cheers. Cheers, okay? Anybody out there, cheers. You got you got your milk, or you got your tea, or your coffee, or your water, or your, I don't know, maybe you're drinking beer. Who knows? Well, here's cheers to you from me. All right. Both vehicles had large crews. The driver, gunner, commander, and two grenade launcher operators, plus two troops in support to fire from 7.62 Hall mounted machine guns. The Object 782, for instance, was theoretically capable of firing at six different targets at the same time. Yeah, that's pretty extreme right there. Both targets, both vehicles were tested from 1987 onwards in Chelyabinsk. The Object 781 won the initial testing and was selected over Object 782, the project of which was cancelled, although the prototype exists to this day. The development of the Object 781 was rated actually very well and continued at Chelyabinsk until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. At that point, the project became the victim of the post-breakup chaos and was canceled as well. Both prototypes eventually ended up at the Kubinka Museum, which is also where the mouse is located, which is, that's where the mouse is. They got the mouse. Kubinkas, the Russians, they got the mouse. The, uh, the pinnacle of, you know, German Axis World War II tank design. Pretty much. Even it doesn't got a. They just got the frame basically. Even though the Object 781 research was canceled, the war in Chechnya and the disastrous result of the tanks used in the city environments restarted the fire support vehicle development. Once again, Chelyabinsk stepped up, developing a completely new vehicle between 1995 and 1996 called Object 787. One prototype was built in 1996. Tell you what, just reading this stuff just tells me, these guys got some advanced stuff, I'll tell you that much. It was basically a T-72AV hull and turret with the Contact 1 reactive armor as the tank designation it suggests. But instead of the usual 125mm cannon, the vehicle was armed with a pair of high elevation 30mm 2A72 guns mounted on the sides of the turret, along with a pair of 12.7mm machine guns. The 30mm guns were also paired with two banks of 80mm S-8 unguided rockets originally developed for helicopters to provide additional firepower. The banks had 6 rockets each. The guns and rockets could elevate to 60 plus degrees and depress to negative 8 degrees, allowing the vehicle to easily engage targets on buildings. The optics consisted of one A40 main optic, TPN 349 night optic, one P310 anti-aircraft optics, TKN 3 commander optics. The vehicle weighed some 47 tons and just like the original T-72AV, had a crew of 3 men. The internal layout was similar to the T-72AV, and so was the armor. Although the Contact 1 elements covered more area, especially on the sides, the gun manlet area was plugged by a welded steel cover and additional ERA elements. It was powered by the 780 horsepower V46 6 diesel engine with the same mobility as the T72A. I mean, 272 AV. The maximum speed was 60 kilometers per hour. The vehicle was sometimes also referred to under the informal nickname Gadyuka. This was, however, never official. The trials that took place between April 4th and April 10th, 1997 at Kubinka have shown excellent results, but the Viper 2 was to be canceled for the strangest of reasons. Initially, many high-positioned Russian officers supported the vehicle, including the chief of GABTU, Colonel General S.A. Mayev, former Marshal of the Soviet Union V.L. Kukulov, and the main Ministry of Defense military advisor Army General M.M. Zaitsev. The military started advertising the vehicle on television and radio, trying to gain as much support for the new vehicle class as possible. This did not sit well with the overseeing institutions, which accused the participants, including the vehicle designers themselves, of publishing Russian military secrets. I've never seen anything like this before. This is like the first time I've ever seen anything like this. An investigation was held, and the entire process resulted in numerous personal changes in the Chelyabinsk tractor plant company, as well as the cancellation of the Object 787 development. The accused designers were forbidden from pursuing the project further, and only prototype was transferred to Ubinka. The Object 787 farce did slow the development of this class of vehicle considerably, but it did not stop it. The Chelyabinsk tractor plant was out of the picture now and stopped developing this type of vehicle altogether, focusing only on tractor building. The idea, however, did not die and was intensively discussed between Ian Radionov, the Russian Minister of Defense between 1996 and 1997, and other members of the military. Eventually, Aralva Gunzavad from Nizhny Tagil would take over the development, and process would eventually become the BMPT series predecessor, Object 199 Ramka. In armored warfare, the Object 787 Gadyuka will be a Tier 6 premium tank destroyer. Like we mentioned above, it'll be possible to assemble the Gadyuka from blueprints available for Battle Path mission completion. Also a returning feature, as well as the Battle Path shop. The Gadyuka concept is rather simple. It's a close range brawler. Essentially a T-72 AAV with autocannons and rockets instead of the main gun, and one tier higher. Logically, while the protection stays the same, the Gadyuka doesn't have APS, just smoke grenade launchers. The balance will shift toward firepower. There are two main weapon systems that can be switched between: the two 30mm 2A7-2 autocannons, which are generic tier 6 through 7 30mm gun balance wise, and two 6 tube 80mm rocket launchers. The very same launchers the MT-LB SB uses, or S8 rather, just without the fancy cylindrical container. Each side of the turret will have one gun rocket mount with excellent depression and elevation. You'll be able to switch rapidly between firing either both guns or both rocket launchers, but beware, both weapon systems will be fairly inaccurate given the fact they are lined to fire in parallel. The mobility will be similar to the T-72AV, which isn't bad for an MBT or track TD, and view range and camouflage values will basically be MBT like as always. Like as well, yeah. By now, it should be clear what the intended playstyle for this vehicle will be one. It's it'll be a brutal close range fighting machine with a lot of short range bursts but poor long range performance. As such, it'll be used best in urban areas where an enemy vehicle may appear right in front of you, in which case he'll get to enjoy a rocket burst following by withering fire of two 30mm autocannons. In other words, an armored warfare equivalent of a shotgun blast. We hope that you'll enjoy the Gadyuka, and as always, see you on the battlefield. So, that's the Gadyuka history. Not too bad. Not too bad of a vehicle. Tier 6, so, I mean, pretty obtainable. If you give the game like $10 and you feel like you're a dedicated player, you want to give the game $10 and you might be able to obtain that one if you play the game a little bit. All right. Yeah, pretty cool. Heavily armored, close range. Not too bad. All right, sounds good. Um, this is Jace White, the guy, telling you to have a good rest of your day or a good rest of your night. And I'll be back here for Norm News coming out to you pretty soon. And catch you later. Have a good one. And I'll see you on the battlefield. Goodbye.